Cyril Badiane adjusted the cuff of his watch with one hand and clutched his car keys in the other as he strode through the marbled hallway of his estate. He was already late for a crucial investor meeting that could determine the future of his company. But as he reached the front door, he came to an abrupt stop. Kneeling on the cold-tiled floor was Aminata, the housemaid, her hands clasped, her eyes bloodshot, her entire body trembling. "Monsieur, je vous en supplie. Please, don't go out today," she begged, voice breaking, barely louder than a whisper. Cyril blinked, confused. "What are you doing? What is this?" he asked, his voice tight with irritation. Aminata looked up, and the raw terror in her eyes froze him in place. "I had a dream last night," she said. "You were wearing exactly what you're wearing now. You got in your car and you never came back. There was blood everywhere. People were screaming your name. Please, monsieur, I beg you, don't go today." The air around them thickened, the silence turning oppressive. This wasn't the usual nonsense dreams he had heard before. She wasn't performing. She was scared, genuinely, deeply scared. Still, his phone buzzed in his pocket, vibrating like a clock ticking away billions. Thomas again, always punctual, always pushing, always about the deal. "Get up," Cyril said, voice low but firm, as he tried to walk past. Aminata didn't move. "I know I'm just the maid," she whispered, "but I couldn't stay silent. If you go out today and something happens to you, I will never forgive myself." He hesitated. From the staircase, the sound of heels echoed down the unmistakable presence of Mariam, his wife. She descended slowly, her silk robe cinched tightly at the waist, her makeup already perfect. She paused when she saw the scene. "What's happening here?" she asked coldly. Cyril turned slightly. "She says I shouldn't leave the house." Mariam arched an eyebrow. "Why?" Aminata didn't lift her head. "I had a dream, a very clear one. If he leaves today, he won't come back alive." Mariam scoffed immediately. "This is exactly why I always said we should fire her. Now she thinks she's some kind of prophetess." Cyril raised a hand, silencing his wife. "Wait," he murmured. Mariam gaped at him. "Wait? For what?" Cyril didn't answer. Something in Aminata's voice rang truer than logic could explain. No dramatic gestures, no tears for show, just fear, raw, honest, unmistakable. And deep in his chest, a small whisper stirred, one that said, "If you go today, you'll regret it." He turned around, walked to the living room table, placed his car keys and his phone on the polished surface, and sat down on the couch without another word. "I'm not going," he said, softly, almost to himself. Aminata exhaled a shaky breath, still kneeling. Mariam stood frozen. "What do you mean, you're not going?" she snapped. "I said that I'm not going." He didn't look up. His eyes were locked on the floor, as if trying to make sense of an invisible map drawn in marble. Mariam huffed in disgust and stormed back upstairs. Aminata slowly rose to her feet, wiped her eyes, picked up a glass of water from the side table, and left quietly. Cyril remained still, heart pounding, her voice echoing in his head. What if she was right? Why did her fear seem more real than anything he had felt in years? What was this pressure in his chest, this weight? The phone on the table vibrated again. He answered. "Hello? Bro, where are you? The investors are furious. We almost lost everything." Thomas's voice barked on the other end. "Yeah, I had to cancel." "Cancel? You realize how much was riding on this deal? This was gold, Cyril." I know, he said quietly. Then talk to me, man. What's going on? Cyril hesitated. How could he explain this? He barely understood it himself. But before he could respond, another call came through Fanta, the office secretary. He picked up. Yes, Fanta? Her voice was shaking. It's Gene, your driver. He's been in an accident. Cyril sat up straight. What? The third plateau bridge. A truck lost control and hit your Lexus. The car flipped. Gene is unconscious in the hospital. We thought it was you in the car. Cyril slowly lowered the phone. The same car, the same route, the same time. A chill ran down his spine. His mind raced back to Aminata's warning. He could see her again, on her knees, tears in her eyes, trembling. And now this. If he had gone out, he would have been in that car. He would have been the one in the hospital or worse. The silence in the house was now suffocating. Mariam walked into the living room, still in her robe, phone in hand. So you're staying home all day now? She said with disdain. Cyril didn't even lift his eyes. There was an accident, he said flatly. Jean took the car, a truck hit him, the car's destroyed. Mariam paused. Her finger froze mid-scroll. And what, you think that means something? She scoffed. I think if I had left, I wouldn't be sitting here. She laughed a cold, bitter sound. So now we're living in a spiritual movie? Accidents happen every day. He looked up at her, really looked at her and saw nothing. No fear, no concern, no gratitude, just annoyance. And in that moment, something cracked inside him. She stays, he said quietly. Who? Aminata. She stays. She's leaving, Mariam barked. She created unnecessary panic. She doesn't get to tell you what to do. This is my house. It's my house too, Cyril said, calm but unwavering. Mariam's jaw tightened. She spun around and stormed out of the room, her perfume lingering like poison in the air. Cyril sank deeper into the couch, hands clasped. He wasn't thinking of Aminata. Not really. He was thinking of something else, something darker, something wrong. He had no proof yet. But the silence in this house, it wasn't just emptiness, it was hiding something. And Cyril had finally started listening. That night, Cyril sat in his study long after the sun had slipped behind the skyline of Abidjan. The room was dim, lit only by the soft hum of a desk lamp, its glow bouncing off the polished wood of his desk. The documents for the Dubai project sat in a crisp folder beside him, waiting. He didn't touch them. He stared at the surface, at the ghostly reflection of his face, mind circling like a hawk. Something had shifted that morning. Something invisible but undeniable. A line had been crossed and now nothing felt safe. When the door creaked open, he didn't flinch. Aminata entered silently, her steps almost soundless against the floor. She held a tray with his untouched dinner and paused near the doorway. Then, as if battling herself, she took a deep breath and spoke. Monsieur, she said, barely audible. Cyril turned. Yes? She glanced at the floor, then stepped forward, her voice softer than ever. Please, don't sign anything this week. Cyril frowned. Why? She kept her gaze low. Last night I dreamt again, clearer this time. You were at your office, signing some documents. After that, everything collapsed. Your company, your accounts. There were police handcuffs. They said you committed fraud, but I knew you hadn't. Still, they arrested you. Cyril felt a chill rise from the base of his spine. He had said nothing to her about the deal, the meetings, the pressure. She shouldn't have known. Before he could respond, Miriam's voice echoed from upstairs. "Where's my chamomile?" Aminata snapped back to herself, gave a small bow, and left the room, taking the untouched tray with her. Cyril sat frozen, the image of himself in handcuffs clinging to his mind like smoke. The next morning, Thomas arrived at the house unannounced, stepping out of a sleek black car with his signature charm. His hair was neatly styled, his cologne unmistakable, his smile large and careless. "My man," he bellowed, arms wide, pulling Cyril into a tight embrace. "Thank God you weren't in that car. That crash was brutal." Cyril returned the hug stiffly. "Yes, lucky." Thomas looked around. "So the psychic maid's still here?" "She's here," Cyril replied simply. Thomas chuckled. "Man, you've changed. Since when do you believe in dreams?" "Since they started saving my life." Thomas raised a brow, then shrugged. "Anyway, the Dubai deal's still hot. We just need your signature. The sooner the better." Cyril nodded slowly. "Send the documents." Later that day, a courier delivered the files. Cyril took them into his office, locked the door, and opened the folder. The moment he read the figures, something twisted in his gut. The numbers didn't match what he had agreed to. The payment was to be wired to a foreign account he had never seen before. Red flags erupted in his mind. He stood up, paced the room, then picked up his phone and called an old friend, a forensic accountant. "I need you to look into something, quietly." Over the next 48 hours, the truth unraveled like a poisoned ribbon. Thomas had been siphoning money from Crestrock for years, disguising it through phantom companies and false development projects. The Dubai deal wasn't a deal, it was a trap. A final move to frame Cyril for laundering and leave him holding the bag. Cyril said nothing. Not yet. He needed more. But he felt the betrayal settle in his bones, heavy and cold. At home, things grew worse. Miriam became erratic, more hostile than usual. She slammed drawers, muttered under her breath, complained constantly about Aminata. "She's too quiet," she snapped one morning. "She moves like she owns the place. I don't trust her." Cyril didn't lift his eyes from his coffee. "She does her job. She's insolent. She's disciplined." Miriam crossed her arms. "She has to go." This time, Cyril looked up. "She stays." Miriam's voice rose. "So now you choose a maid over your wife?" He sipped his coffee slowly. "I choose my peace." That night, Miriam slept in the guest room. She stormed about for hours, restless and angry. Around midnight, she picked up her phone and called a number she had memorized too well. "I can't take it anymore," she whispered when Thomas answered. "She's still here. He won't let her go. She's in everything. She watches everything. She's not normal." Thomas exhaled loudly. "We're still on track. Don't panic." "Don't panic?" she hissed. "You told me to marry him. You said we'd get access to the accounts, to everything. We've done everything you asked, years of pretending, and look where we are. We're still in the plan. We sent those men that night, remember? Armed, waiting on the Ajam road. But she told him not to take that route. How did she know? Every time we set a trap, she moves him out of the way." "I know," Thomas said, his voice low. "It's like she sees the future." Miriam's voice broke. "I hate living here. I hate sharing a bed with a man I don't love. I hate pretending. I'm tired." "Do you love me?" he asked. "Yes," she replied, almost sobbing. "I did it all for you, but if nothing changes soon, I'm leaving." Saturday night came quietly. Cyril sat on the balcony, reading financial reports under the dim light. Miriam entered the living room dressed for travel-fitted dress, scarf over her braids, manicured nails glinting in the light. "I'm going to Buak tomorrow," she announced. "My father isn't well." Cyril didn't even glance up. "Okay. I'll be back Monday." "All right." She waited. For a reaction, for a nod, for concern. But there was nothing. Only the silence of a man who had seen too much. She forced a smile and walked away. Cyril watched her leave through the window, his face blank. Once the door closed, he picked up his phone and made a call. "Follow her. Don't approach. Don't be seen. Report everything." And the next morning, Miriam left at 7 a.m., all charm and polish. By 8 the first message came through. She didn't go to Buak. She went straight to Marcury, Hotel Boutique, registered under Madame T. Ogan. Cyril didn't react. At 10 a.m., another text. Thomas arrived, hat low, sunglasses on. He went straight to her room. Cyril looked at the photo attached, then sat back in his chair. No rage, no shock. He had known for weeks. This was merely confirmation. At 6:20 p.m., he arrived at the hotel. The receptionist hesitated, but a few crisp bills ended her questions. Room 207. He didn't knock. He opened the door, and there they were. Miriam, in a white bathrobe, sipping wine. Thomas, shirtless, lounging on the couch. They both froze. The glass in Miriam's hand trembled. Thomas stood up too fast. Cyril said nothing. He stepped inside, stared at them one by one. "Cyril," Miriam began. Thomas tried to grin. "Bro, don't speak," Cyril said calmly, raising a hand. They fell silent. "You married me for this?" he asked Miriam, eyes dark. "You never looked at me. You were always married to your work," she said, trembling. "And you were married to my bank account," he replied. "You and your business partner." Miriam's eyes dropped. "I hope it was worth it," Cyril said. Then he turned and walked out. No shouting, no slamming doors, just the quiet of a man who had finally seen enough. That night, Cyril sat alone in his office, lights dimmed, the sounds of the city muted behind thick curtains. The silence didn't feel empty. It felt like something alive, whispering to him from the corners of the room. He didn't cry. He didn't drink. He just stared at the documents on his desk, the papers that should have made him a richer man, but instead revealed the rotting core of everything he'd built. His fingers hovered over his phone, and he made 2 calls. One to his lawyer, one to the company accountant. "Prepare divorce proceedings," he said flatly, "and initiate the process to buy out Thomas's shares immediately." There was no hesitation in his voice, no room for argument. Over the next few days, Cyril barely ate. The house, once gleaming with wealth, now felt like a golden tomb. Every painting on the wall, every velvet cushion, every designer lamp seemed to mock him. He had loved a lie, trusted a traitor. And still, there she was, Amanetta, moving through the house like a quiet guardian. She didn't ask questions. She didn't change her rhythm. She swept the corners, folded linens, cooked meals he didn't touch. She made no mention of what had happened, but her silence wasn't ignorance, it was grace. When the divorce papers returned, already signed by Miriam, Cyril didn't blink. She hadn't even shown up to the lawyer's office. Her only message had been relayed through her attorney. "Tell him I accept everything. I just want peace." Peace? After orchestrating his destruction, after sleeping in his bed each night while plotting his fall, she wanted peace? Cyril signed without a tremble. but inside, something burned. That evening, he returned to the living room, lights warm, windows open. The house looked pristine, but it felt hollow. He had everything and nothing. And then, quietly, she entered. "Good evening, monsieur," Aminata said, standing by the doorway. Cyril looked up from the couch. "You don't need to knock," he murmured. She stepped forward, hands folded. "I wanted to let you know. I'll be leaving tomorrow." His chest tightened. He sat straighter. "Why?" She didn't avert her gaze. "Because my work here is done." He stood slowly. "No, you don't need to leave. You're the only person who hasn't lied to me. You're the only one who saw the traps before they closed and warned me. You saved me." "I know," she said gently, "but I wasn't sent to stay. I was sent to save." He looked at her, searching her face, trying to find the lines of some larger story behind her eyes. "By who?" he asked. She gave the smallest smile. "That's not important." He moved closer, wanting to say something, anything, but his throat closed. She continued softly, "If you had signed those documents, you would have lost your business, your name, your freedom. Right now, you'd be in prison for a crime you didn't commit, while the people who planned your fall would be sipping coffee in a hotel suite." His jaw clenched. She inhaled deeply. "But you didn't sign. You stayed. You listened. And that means something. It means you're ready." "Ready for what?" he asked, his voice cracking slightly. "To start over, but this time with your eyes open." They stood there in silence, the space between them filled with truth. Then Aminata smiled, not a goodbye smile, but one that said, "You'll be all right." She stepped back toward the door. "Live well," she said softly. "Trust carefully. Love wisely. Watch everyone." She opened the door, and just like that, she was gone. Cyril stood in the doorway long after she disappeared down the hall. He didn't follow. He didn't cry. But something inside him cracked and healed. That night, he walked into his study, picked up the wedding photo of him and Mariam, stared at it for a long, still moment, and then let it fall. The glass shattered across the floor like truth breaking free from denial. He crouched, picked up a shard, and saw his reflection cut, bruised, but awake. And for the first time in years, he smiled. Not because things were okay, but because he was okay. The storm had passed, and he had survived. The next morning, Cyril woke up before sunrise. Not because he had something urgent to do, but because for the first time in a long time, he simply could. The bed felt colder, larger, emptier than ever before, but there was something peaceful in the quiet. He didn't hear Miriam's sharp voice echoing from the hall. He didn't smell her perfume clinging to the curtains. What he felt instead was the void silent, undisturbed and strangely calming. Aminata was gone. There was no tray of warm tea waiting on the kitchen counter, no faint sound of sweeping, no whisper of footsteps that usually made the house feel less like a museum. The silence this time wasn't heavy. It was clean, like a wound finally aired out. Cyril stood at the kitchen island and poured himself a glass of water. No coffee, no breakfast, just water and the knowledge that he was alive. He stepped outside, barefoot, the early sun just brushing the tops of the trees. For months, maybe years, he hadn't noticed the garden he paid someone to maintain. Now, he stood there watching the morning light pass through the leaves, and he realized how far he had wandered from who he used to be. That afternoon, he walked into the Crest Rock headquarters with quiet determination. The receptionist blinked in surprise. She hadn't seen him in person for weeks. No chauffeur, no entourage, just Cyril in a crisp shirt, a steady stride, and eyes that saw everything. The board meeting was scheduled for noon, but by 10 he had already sent a company-wide email. Effective immediately, Thomas Onanga has been relieved of all duties pending internal investigation. Reactions rippled through the building like electricity. When Thomas showed up 2 hours later, his usual grin in place, he found his access card had already been revoked. 2 security guards met him in the lobby. Cyril didn't need to say a word. The evidence he had gathered had done all the talking. By evening, the news had hit the business networks Crestrock was initiating a full financial audit. Cyril gave no press statements, no denials, no flashy shows of leadership, just quiet, thorough correction. He met with the legal team. He brought in outside auditors. He reviewed every transaction. He didn't yell. He didn't scold. He simply fixed, piece by piece, system by system. And for every corrupt hand he removed, he opened a door for new talent, young professionals, ethical voices, fresh eyes. He launched a hiring initiative in Buak, focusing on local youth with ambition but no access. He visited their community halls, spoke directly to students. "You don't need to be born rich," he told them. "You need to stay awake. That's enough." Within months, Crestrock began to feel different, leaner, smarter, cleaner. The name Cyril Badian no longer just meant money, it meant integrity. He was rebuilding, not just a company, but himself. At home, the changes were just as deep. He sold the marble, heavy villa and moved into a simpler, sunlit home near Cockatee, where the breeze came through the windows and no one cared about how many bedrooms there were. He started cooking for himself. He answered the doorbell. He cleaned his own desk. There were no more art pieces flown in from Italy, no more rooms unused, just space that breathed. And slowly, as the months passed, the heaviness in his chest began to lift. He started eating with appetite, smiling without rehearsing, sleeping without pills. One Sunday afternoon, while attending a quiet charity event for displaced children in Yamoussoukro, he met her. Not a model, not a socialite, just a woman with curious eyes and a soft voice who was organizing book donations. She wasn't impressed by his name. She didn't know how much he was worth, but she loved books. She loved silence, and she listened like it mattered. They didn't rush. He didn't impress her with stories of his wealth. He talked about trees, and she listened like trees were poetry. When he walked her to her car, she offered him a book. Things Fall Apart. "You've read it?" she asked. "I lived it," he replied, smiling, and she laughed not because it was charming, but because she understood. That night, he didn't go home thinking he'd met the love of his life. He went home feeling like maybe, just maybe, the ground beneath him was solid again. That maybe there was more life ahead. That maybe being broken was not the end, but the beginning. The portrait of his past, with all its cracks and betrayals, now sat inside a folder in a locked cabinet. He didn't hate Miriam anymore. He didn't wish pain upon Thomas. He didn't need revenge. He had found something better. Peace. And peace, as he had learned, was not given. It was earned. Earned by waking up, by paying attention, by saying no, by walking away, and by listening to the quiet voices others ignored, especially the ones that came in dreams. It took 1 full year, 1 long, quiet, deliberate year for Cyril to rebuild not just his company, but his soul. There were no grand announcements, no social media declarations, no triumphant interviews on glossy magazine covers. Instead, there were early mornings in the office, late nights reviewing documents, long walks by the lagoon, and the kind of silence that didn't hurt anymore. His name, once whispered in expensive lounges and business clubs with envy or fear, was now spoken with something else: respect. He had pulled Crestrock out of the fire, not by brute force, but with clarity and conscience. The company was leaner, cleaner, and faster than ever before. Profits had stabilized, corruption had been rooted out, and people within the industry whispered a new word when they spoke of Cyril Badian, principled. Yet, despite all the success, Cyril had not returned to who he was before. That man, the one who loved shiny dinners, who trusted too easily, who mistook charm for loyalty, he was gone. In his place stood a man slower to speak, faster to observe, and infinitely more patient. He didn't need applause anymore. He had something rarer: peace. His days were different now. He worked, yes, but he also read, cooked, listened to music he hadn't touched in years. On weekends he volunteered, not for show, not for press, but because it reminded him that power was not in how many buildings bore your name, but how many lives you touched quietly. The woman from the charity event? She didn't disappear. They had coffee the following week. Then a long walk along the shore. Then, eventually, a dinner with no candlelight, no tuxedos, just two people talking about books and how hard it is to stay honest in a noisy world. Her name was Clarice. She was a teacher. She didn't wear luxury. She wore joy. She didn't ask about his past. She asked what made him laugh as a child. She didn't try to fix him. She simply walked beside him. Cyril didn't rush. He didn't call it love. Not at first. He just knew that when she was around, he breathed easier. And one night, while watching the stars from his modest garden, he reached for her hand. She didn't flinch. She just laced her fingers with his. No declarations were made. But something powerful settled between them. And he understood. This was how truth arrived, not with fireworks, but with stillness. Still, there were days when the shadows of his past crept in. Nights when he woke remembering Mariam's voice, or the look in Thomas's eyes as the door closed. But now, he didn't run from those memories. He let them pass like waves. He was no longer drowning. He had learned to float. One evening, as he prepared dinner for Clarice grilled fish, her favorite, his phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. He almost ignored it, but something told him to pick up. "Hello?" "Monsieur Cyril." It was a woman's voice, soft, unsteady. "Yes?" "This is Aminata's sister." His heart skipped. He hadn't heard that name in a year. The woman continued. "Aminata asked me to call you. She's in Ghana now. She said to tell you, the seed has grown." Cyril's throat tightened. He couldn't speak. "She also said," the woman added gently, "that your path is not over, just clearer now. That was all." The line went silent. Cyril stood still, phone still in hand, a strange warmth rushing through his chest. Outside, the wind rustled the trees. The sky deepened into twilight. Clarice appeared in the doorway, smiling. "Dinner smells good," she said. Cyril turned slowly and smiled back, not the smile of a man who had conquered, but the smile of a man who had survived, who had healed, and who was finally free. That night, as they sat across from each other in the soft glow of the kitchen, he looked at her and said something he hadn't said in a very long time. "I'm happy." She reached across the table, took his hand, and held it. He didn't need anything else. Not revenge, not recognition. Just this. A second chance. A quieter life. A heart that beat without fear. And the memory of a girl who knelt on cold tiles one morning and changed everything.